Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here in your cars, in your rooms, in Milan, wherever you're zooming in from. Thanks so much. Welcome. You all know I'm Marcella Shulak, and I just began again to be the director of the Shaindy Rudoff Graduate Program in Creative Writing. And I'm delighted to welcome you to our annual reading for the 2020-2021 graduates. This dual reading will also feature a very special prize that was created this year, the Multicultural Israel Prize. And oh, wow, my Zoom just took over my notes. There we go. And this was given to us with the generous support of the Lecter Institute, and I'll say more about that later. But tonight we have 7 of about 15 graduates who will share poetry, fiction, creative nonfiction translations from their MA theses. These talented graduates will be introduced by their thesis advisors. And you will meet nearly all of us who've had the privilege of teaching creative writing as we introduce our students, but we owe a huge debt to our colleagues on the literature side. And I'll just read out the ones that are not thesis advisors for these particular graduates. These are Drs. Daniel Feldman, Kara Glatt, and Esther Shupak, as well as Professor Emeritus Michael Kramer. These teachers and researchers inspire our writers with the passion and insight they bring to the teaching of literature. We're all tremendously grateful to Professor Alana Bloomberg, who directed the graduate program for the last 5 years until this August. And this was, as you all know, the extremely challenging time of studying on Zoom. So I'm deeply impressed with all of you who studied online for 18 of the 24 months that you were with us. It was not easy, and you were amazing. And you'll see, as you see, some of you are zooming in from abroad, which is a testimony to your commitment. Now, without any further ado, I'll ask the thesis advisors to say their names before they introduce their students, beginning with Professor Kolbrenner. And I'll try to remind you to unmute yourself before you get ready to.
So thank you, Marcel. And it's really weird to be back on Zoom. That's just a weird situation after seeing real humans, but it's very good to see everybody here, especially the students that I've had the privilege of being in workshop with and advising. And we definitely want to thank Marcella for putting this together. And we want to thank the Evan Fallenberg, who has now found himself in 2 roles as the great fiction writer and instructor of the department and chair of the department. So thank you, Evan. So now I get to turn to Roy Atadgy's, I've never pronounced your last name, Roy, Roy's thesis, which is really going to be a book. Roy has written a book called Downward is Heavenward, and it's a novel that's very much situated in the American landscape. And one of the great things about it is truly an American novel and an American Jewish novel, really very much after Roth. And really in the mold, in some sense, of Roth's American Pastoral, that is taking into account a large swath of history. And the book is really brilliant for the dialogue that Roy creates between the present moment and the past, the religious past, the fundamentalist religious past of this town in Pennsylvania called Westchester. So Roy, it's all yours.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks for everybody for being here. And I'm going to read a little selection about the main character talking to his father about his newfound relationship with this woman. Another time over summer break, I came home to an interrogation about a draft of a letter to Luciana that had gotten stuck in my father's printer. Who is this Luciana? I showed him a picture, as if by her beauty alone my father would understand. Israeli, he asked hopefully, noting the dark features. Not even close, I said, a little too proudly. Well, sort of, I corrected course. She's Italian, so in the same neighborhood. Religiously in the same neighborhood? Catholic. And you love her? You read the letter, didn't you? Enough to marry her? His eyes began to well up with tears. I had never seen my father cry. He didn't then, he suppressed the urge. But he wouldn't in the years to come. Everything about his demeanor as a father up to this point was orchestrated either by humor or military stolidity, this former IDF tank commander with the steel-plated fortitude of a tank. Weeping was something new and frightening on the spectrum of his emotions. I don't know, does it matter, I said. Of course it matters, your children won't be Jewish. So, this word, the shameless ease with which it was uttered, nearly shattered his resolve. What if your family doesn't show up to your wedding? Trying to introduce some levity, as I started being panicked by his pain, I smiled. Are you trying to deter me or encourage me? Now, jokes, this is what you want to do to your father? I'm not trying to do anything except be happy. Apparently, my happiness is your misery. Besides, she isn't the first woman I've dated that wasn't Jewish. Far from it. Now you have a problem? I have a problem because I can see how serious you feel about her. Oh, so now it's a matter of seriousness. Fuck Gentiles to my heart's content, but God forbid I fall in love with one. That's where you draw the line. Yes, he said, his stout body trembling, his husky forearms tensing. That is exactly where I draw the line. My father couldn't take it, this new portrait of a son on his own, and I couldn't torture him further by painting it in front of him stroke by stroke, defending my choices as I went. So after a while, I just shut up. My life with Luch, with literature, with turning my back, would have to be a life behind the scenes, I decided, without my parents. And I was willing to omit, willing to white lie and circumvent. I'd move all the way out to Oregon. I'd have grandchildren they'd never know, and a Christmas tree in the foyer with mezuzahs as ornaments. Still, my father's hopes were hard-nosed detectives, endeavored with patrilineal destiny. It seemed, standing there arguing with him, that the urgent, historical weight of the entire Jewish bloodline surged at his back, the superabundant familial pressure building in his voice as he tried to retrieve his first-round draft pick for the Jewish people in any way he could. To her credit, my mother, who had come to Israel from Poland, born into a family decimated by the Holocaust a generation earlier, that didn't talk about difficulties or hopes or the advancement of the Jewish people, didn't share in my father's fervency, but worried nonetheless. It really doesn't matter, honey. You love her? Good. That's enough. But don't tell your father I said that. This she had whispered to me over the phone after the big falling out I had with him. My mother was a complete reversal of the mythological and overbearing Jewish mothers I'd had the unfortunate displeasure to meet throughout my life, at bar mitzvahs, during holidays, in delis, at birthday parties, self-assured to the max, unrelenting in their passionate prodding, functioning neurotics, bulls of women. I thought I'd be inclined towards someone more timid, melancholy, reserved, like my mother and like me. I had never believed opposites attracted, only that they brought trouble. It surprised me then that over the years, I'd steadily developed a partiality for women like her opposites, whom I publicly voiced my dislike for, while in private had summoned more than a few uncouth fantasies about. Luciana's personality loomed large. It always had, way before I came into the picture. A colossal woman, not in the figure, but in the heart, in the tongue, and with all the neuroticism and braininess of a Jewish woman, only without the birthright necessary for my father to fully have welcomed her as the matriarch for the next generation of Sofers. That's, of course, if she and I could ever get past our years-long circus to settle down enough for that. The funny thing is, I remember I didn't even give her the time of day at first. Looking back on those first impressions, it was hard to see anything resembling a future there. She was loud, stubborn, almost annoyingly persistent, a brash provocateur in group discussion. That summer, when I first arrived in Westchester, I bemoaned her unannounced visitations to my apartment, but her persistence would continue to wear on me month after month, transmuting a feeling on the verge of contempt into one of confounding curiosity and arousal each time I peeked through the blinds to find her at my door peeling blades of grass. Who is this person and what does she want from me? The only thing at the time that I couldn't figure out. Rationality, reason, and a sense of predictability might have worked well for me in college, but applied to Luch, these dependable practices did me just as good and got me just as far as speaking Japanese to a Texan. Even when the sublet who'd introduced us vacated the apartment before the fall semester started, Luch continued to change smoke on the front step through March, still in summer clothes, waiting for some acknowledgement I hadn't yet learned how to give. Pure, unadulterated persistence. I remember what she had written to me on a letter on my birthday the year before we broke up. She had signed the letter, "Your Jewess in training." How's that for a declaration by a woman of Catholic rearing? Not a Semitic suffix in her entire lineage, not a Stein, Witz, or Berg to be found. Instead, hers was a lineage of passionate, enduring, violent Caros. In the years we were involved, I'd watched myself grow up under the tutelage of Luch's trials and tribulations. Each new setback we were presented with brought a new wisdom to being with each other. It was remarkable to see. I learned how to be a modern man at long last. For that, I had her to thank. New ideas, fresh views, a sanding down of the rough impulses of early manhood had made me a worthy and self-aware mate. But I learned too, with each argument that spiraled out of control, how to lose my mind at long last, with her to thank for that as well. For this wasn't merely the hot and cold entanglement of a romantic comedy, it had layers of intimacy unexplainable to the average dolt, unattainable by just any kind of pedestrian love, and steeped in danger, hostility, and mental acrobatics unseen in couples with 3 times the length of our amorous internment. High emotion, persistent melodrama, what human beings claim to despise and yet peddle in significant quantities, was our bread and butter. And, knowing this probably, my father persisted over the phone. Have you tried the local JCC? How about JDate? Have you joined the email list for Hillel? Been to any of their alumni events? How about Teddy Avishai's daughter? Don't you remember her? Smart, brilliant, in her 2nd year at Baruch. She asked about you. Later that year, in a rare fit of impulsivity, I would gift my father a nervous breakdown upon revealing my plans to ask Luch to marry me, which for him meant doing 2 things he would not ordinarily do: cry on the phone every time we spoke thereafter, and getting in touch with the rabbi. Once at the synagogue and inside the rabbi's wood-paneled office, he would attempt, as if in some campaign strategy session, to elicit from Rabbi Weinberg a plan of attack that would appeal to the inner depths of my Judaism and cause me to cease this moral catastrophe that I had simply and oppositely come to know as love.
Thank you, Roy.
Thank you.
That was wonderful. And you've also given me the perfect in to introduce my first student, Tamar Do, because, well, even though Tamar Do may sound typically Israeli, she's Italian through and through. Jewish Italian, that is, which is a fascinating subculture or double culture. And it is precisely on that intersection between Orthodox Judaism and Italian culture that Tamar decided to focus her thesis, which is a translation of 50 short essays by the Italian Orthodox Jewish journalist Geula Canaruto Nemni. Through translation, Tamar is helping Ms. Nemni bring her voice to a larger audience outside Italy. And through Ms. Nemni, Tamar has been deepening her own understanding of the different cultures that comprise her. So, Tamar, please.
Thank you. So I'm going to read a short article titled January 27th, the story of an Italian Jewish prayer book that got away from Auschwitz. Someone was knocking at the door. It was 3 a.m. Signora Rabello, open the door. It's me, your neighbor. A noise interrupted Alba's sleep, troubled, full of nightmares sleep. The noise at the door didn't stop, and her husband Emilio got up to see who it was. It was their neighbor, the one his wife often chatted with. Signora Bello, thank God you opened the door. I waited until it was night so that no one could see me. You have to hurry up. I heard from the custodian that someone reported you. They will come to take you in the morning. A man of few words, Emilio wished the woman the best he could at that moment. Thank you, Miss Petrelli. God bless you. Emilio went to his wife. Alba, hurry up. They're coming. There was no need to specify who was coming and why. Alba and Emilio knew it was just a matter of time, and from the moment they had lost the chance to sail on the last ship from Europe to the USA, they were worried that the backup plan would not work. Alba quickly got up, grabbed the suitcase that had been ready for weeks under her bed, and packed her nightgown. She let her children sleep until the last moment. Each minute far from reality was a precious treasure. Alba, remember not to pack things that may reveal who we are. We have to appear to be Italians going to the countryside. Alba listened to him in silence, her heart pounding. It was cold outside, and Wally was crying for milk. Please, not now, said Alba to her 3-month-old baby. They made their way to Milan Central Station. They were heading to Lanzo d'Intelvi, and then they would cross the mountains to reach the border with Switzerland. With God's help, whispered Alba, looking at the blue sky. Stop. Their hearts jumped in their chests. Don't cry, not now. Be strong, do it for your children. The family stopped in the middle of Via Sardegna, just moments after leaving their house. Passers-by looked stealthily while the officer was talking. "Where are you going?" "Visiting friends in the mountains. They invited us for a few days," answered Emilio, repeating what he had been practicing in front of the mirror countless times. "Open the suitcases," he ordered. Alba's legs were shaking. She clung to faith, the ray of light and hope that helped her people survive the infinite attempts to make it disappear. "Of course," said Alba, bitterly smiling for being a recently married girl whose right to regular life had been stolen. Children's clothing, blankets, 2 spare skirts, 2 jackets for Emilio. "What is this?" asked the officer impetuously. The phrase "prayer book, Italian rite" on the first page was unaware of the danger it could pose. Alba tried to ignore the scared and accusatory look of her husband. She could not leave her identity behind. She was proud to be Jewish, to belong to that people. She didn't want to be afraid of being who she was. "It is the book I used to teach Greek," answered Alba, secure as someone who is challenging destiny. A moment of silence, a time frame separating life from death. The officer closed the book. Alba could not look at her husband. That book represented her faith, the ability to believe and pray, and no one could have ever taken that away from her. It represented the bond to her ancestors, to her parents, inseparable from her essence. An angel moved the lips of the officer and, instead of pronouncing their death sentence, he said, "You can go," motioning his hand as that could instantly move the family to a safe place. The prayer book made it to Lanzudintelvi together with Alba, Emilio, and their 2 children. It passed under the barbed wire without being felt by the wolfhounds guarding the border. It was opened and closed for 2 years in the internment camp in Switzerland. "God, please, let me see my parents and my family again," Alba said every time before hiding it between her 2 skirts. The book returned to Milan in 1945, together with the Rabello family. Some of their relatives had been transported to Auschwitz and Birkenau and turned into ashes. The prayer book assisted Alba until her last breath, resting on the bed table, opened and closed 3 times a day, the symbol of the resilience of a people that has never stopped having faith, passing, telling, and especially praying. Alba, my grandmother, always said to me, "Learn this by heart, Geula. Bechol drachecha daeu. In all your ways, know God." Even in the darkest moments, when they attempted taking all we had away from us and destroying our identity, we held on to faith, because there is something worse than physical death, spiritual one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tamar. That was a beautiful piece. It was the right choice of all the 50 articles for sure. And I don't know if everybody can appreciate all the difficulties in the translation there, but there were many, 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 and Tamar overcame them. Thank you. I'm going to introduce the next reader, even though I wasn't directly her mentor. I did teach her and enjoyed that role very much. This is Anat Hinkis I'm talking about. And her mentor was Dalia Rosenfeld, who couldn't be with us this evening. So she sent me something to read in her place. One of the many tasks of a writer is to try to understand human behavior while letting the reader feel that they have discovered these mysteries on their own without any outside help or interference. This process of conveying character implicitly through objects, action, and dialogue is one that Anat and I explored tirelessly during the time we worked together on her thesis. And what do you know? It seems that hard work combined with an enviably positive attitude sometimes pays off. For as she was putting the finishing touches on her final story, leaving just enough white space at the end for the reader to fill in the blanks, I could see that we no longer needed to come up with strategies for applying one or another technique. Anat intuitively knew what to do, how to turn a dreary wait at an airport into a life-altering trip, how to renew the spark in a relationship through a pair of pants, how to reveal the regrets of a grandmother through a plastic anatomical model. She had become her own teacher. I couldn't agree more. I remember all of those stories that were just referenced, and I give you Anat Hinkis.
Hi, everybody. I was very moved by Tamar's piece. And this is kind of a sharp contrast, so I'll try and do this putting a bit of humor into the mix. Okay. It's called The Send-Off, and I'm reading the first scene, a scene and a half. The ground attendant at the check-in counter pushed the 2 passports back to us. Step over to the supervisor, please, she gestured to her right. I could tell that she was frustrated about something and prepared my commiserating smile when my father stepped forward. Overbooking, he said, starting with a question and ending with a declaration, as he realized mid-word he was correct. The woman responded by gliding backward on her chair, marking the end of her responsibility. But news traveled fast to the couple queuing behind us, who began to shift their bags and make a move. I quickly pulled my dad and my daughter and their suitcases over to the counter she had indicated, just barely maintaining our place as first in line. The supervisor clicked away at the keyboard, and Rosie's eyes flashed red with a buildup of tears. What's this overbooking? She mumbled into my shirt. A financial strategy, my dad said loudly. I whispered, the airline sells more tickets than they actually have, in case some people don't show up for their flight. But that's not fair, Rosie said. It's a grand injustice to teach you that life is fair, my dad said. Rosie smiled at him, but I could tell she wasn't sure if he was joking. When I was a kid, I always took this as a joke, but now it wasn't clear to me either. It was pretty clear, however, that my morning wasn't going as planned. I had wanted a quick and cheerful send-off by the security gate, a hug, a kiss, and a wave goodbye. Rosie, who has always been anxious while traveling, was now chewing on a lock of hair and shifting from foot to foot. My dad excused himself to go to the bathroom, and the couple behind us, well-dressed and tall, inched into the gap he left, a challenge I accepted by planting my forearm on the counter, smack in the middle of the supervisor, in the front of the supervisor, sorry. The longer she ignored us, the more tension built up between our bodies, like an athlete's pulse yearning to run into the flow of feet and suitcases pouring towards the departure gates. We should have left the house earlier, Rosie said. There's no point looking back, I said. You know what they say, if you've never been bumped off a flight, you're spending too much time at airports. They say that about missing a flight, said the tall man near my ear. Oh, right. Well, we can make up another proverb. Time flies when you're grounded. There were no peals of laughter. You must have a better one, I leaned over the counter to the supervisor. Am I right? Finally, she lifted her eyes. I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do right now, she said. We have to wait to see if any seats become available. It was my idea that the 2 of them spend more time together. Rosie was turning 10, old enough to carry on an interesting conversation. She doesn't want any more toys, I said when my dad mentioned he wanted to get her something big for her birthday. How about a fun day with Granddad? You can take her for pizza and ice cream. Oh, good, he said. I'm glad you're on board with this. Then he called me back with dates for a trip to Rome. Besides the best pizza, I'll teach her other things. For example, a history lesson about the slow and sad decline of the magnificent empire that destroyed the temple. Sounds fun, Dad, but I think not. If she gets a trip like that for her 10th birthday, what will she expect for her bat mitzvah? Listen, he said after a pause, I need to show you something important. When can you come over? The important thing was a cardboard box on the floor of his study. I approached it with caution, thinking he wanted me to store it for him, or sort it for him, or clean it out for him. But when he lifted the lid, I was swept with nostalgia. Over the last few years, he had gotten lax in maintaining his apartment. Papers piled up on his desk and gathered dust. The bookshelves weren't alphabetized. But there in the box were 3 clean new binders, neatly filled with documents, an image that reminded me of the large desk in his home office during my childhood, a room that was an island of order in the messy sea that was the rest of our house. Every day he would wipe that desk clean with a microfiber cloth and dust each item placed on it, scissors, a pen holder, and 3 folders just like the ones in the box. If we knocked, we were invited into his kingdom. We were welcome to borrow a stapler if there was a proven record of our ability to return it promptly to its place. Sometimes I had difficulty falling asleep at night, and I would find him there and climb onto his lap. He never much liked children's books, so he would read me lectures or articles he was working on until I fell asleep, which couldn't have taken more than 5 minutes. "This is the file of finance," he said, taking out the first file. "You'll need this when the day comes." "And what day is that?" He patted it lovingly. "All the information is here, what I had before the divorce and what I was left with." I clenched my teeth for a moment, but didn't say anything. I preferred, when spending time with one parent, to make absolutely no reference to the other. I took out the second file. It was full of newspaper clippings of his articles. My father could write about anything. He could make mathematics sound poetic. "I call this one The Life," he said. In the last pocket of The Life was a small stack of pictures. Here he was in sepia as a young man in a turtleneck sweater, pulling out a book from a stacked shelf. There, in square black-rimmed glasses, grinning in a doorway of a bookstore. There was a picture I remembered taking myself in a bookstore in Jerusalem. He was heavier, with salt and pepper hair. There were more, all in bookshops. Put into the right order, they could make a flip book of growing old. A nice collection. "There's one missing," he said, "of me standing in front of a bookshop with an arched doorway. Do you remember? You took it, or it may have been your sister. I must have left it at your mother's in the bookcase somewhere inside a dictionary. Could you look for it when you have a chance?" I put the pictures back in the file. I didn't have the heart to tell him that Mom had donated the contents of the bookcase and bought a Kindle. He picked up the last file and handed it to me. There was something grave in his gesture, which made me think that this was, at last, important. It was full of medical records. Dated from most recent history, they reported the findings of different kinds of eye tests and blood tests that meant nothing to me. As I flipped further, I found hospital release letters from the early years of him living with type 1 diabetes, and the last document was from the first diagnosis in 1988. I remembered his protruding collarbones and that he was too weak to walk down the stairs until he started injecting insulin and got his strength back. "I call this file The Decline." "Dad." "What? Seriously? 70 is the new 60, don't you know? And you're doing great. What decline are you talking about?" "My eyes." "Your eyes?" "I've been getting shots into my eyeballs for 6 months now." "You have? Why didn't you tell me? What's wrong with your eyes?" "Diabetic retinopathy. All the old people come with their son or their daughter, but I come alone. So I wanted to tell you, but I don't want you to come." "Why?" "When I was your age, I had to look after the old relatives, my Uncle Moishe and Aunt Chava and my mother. The survivors had chronic illnesses. You are already 40, but I've never yet called you in the middle of the night." "Does diabetic retinopathy require treatment in the middle of the night?" He sighed. "You're missing the point. It's already difficult for me to read. There's a 50% chance that I will lose my eyesight before Har Bat Mitzvah."
Thank you, Anat. And unfortunately, we don't get to hear the whole story, but it's worth it. I was wondering if by chance you were going to read the Rome story after those 2 references we had from Roy and Tamar, but I can promise you all that Shuki, our next reader, Shuki Kaynan, will not continue the Italian thing. I know this book backwards and forwards, and there's nothing about Italy in there. Shuki Kaynan is a polyglot school teacher who somehow, in spite of his intelligence and cosmopolitanism, did not do a BA in his 20s and came instead to Bar Ilan a few decades later and wound up staying right through his MA. Shuki is one of those rare people who can translate 3 languages in all directions. But for his thesis, Shuki chose a quiet but psychologically potent detective thriller called The Woman Who Wasn't There by Ila Ben Porat, which he translated so seamlessly that I had to keep slowing myself down when reading it. Shuki has found his own masterful voice in translation, and he uses it effectively to bring other voices to the page in English. Shuki Kaynan.
Thank you. I hope I don't need to do much background. This is about a police detective investigating a cold 5-year-old missing persons case. Following the exchange with Zvika, she went back to her office to gather her thoughts. So, what did she know? It had obviously been a mistake not to classify Yafit Naim as a high-risk case, but now she had a better understanding of how it had happened. As Zvika said, Yafit was unfortunate enough to disappear at the same time as the Tishbik twins. What chance did she even stand against 2 7-year-olds disappearing from their home in Kiryat Ono in the middle of the day? Consequently, and through no fault of Zvika's, this case got lost in the shuffle. Besides, she had to admit to herself, for all of Zvika's faults, sloppiness and irresponsibility were not among them. It is true that he wasn't anybody's favorite at the station. What with his movie star looks, his arrogance and over-competitiveness, but none of his colleagues would ever cast aspersions as to his intelligence or professional skills. And he had definitely followed all of the procedures in this case as well. Everything that needed to be done in a missing persons case, questioning the husband, getting statements from neighbors and co-workers, checking hospital registers, going over the missing person's daily routine, as well as all the other steps, had been carried out in a timely and proficient manner. To be frank, putting aside his hostility towards her for a second, there might be some justification to his resentment over the fact that she had been promoted over him. If it weren't for Amiram's unabashed dislike of him, he would more than likely have been promoted long before. Even though she and Zvika had known each other for several years, having gone through officer training together, they had never really been close or even on friendly terms. Nevertheless, up until her promotion, she had managed to maintain a cordial professional relationship. Only in the wake of her promotion did everything go wrong. He couldn't conceal his disappointment and the feeling that he'd been wronged. It all happened shortly after he had headed the team that solved the Judge Klein murder case, and he was convinced that this had guaranteed his promotion. When he found out that Amiram hadn't recommended him, he became enraged and made it clear that he blamed her for it. But he was obviously wrong. Amiram just couldn't stand him, and he'd had nothing to do with her. Who knows, she thought to herself. Maybe now that Spectre was in charge, his luck would change. And in any case, at least Spectre wouldn't refer to him as the model. As her mother liked to say, sometimes one person's misfortune is another's fortune. She went back to leafing through the documents, pursing her lips in concentration, and hoping that some piece of evidence would magically pop up to reveal what in heaven's name had happened to Yafit Naim, the woman who one day left home only to vanish into thin air. Snatches of the conversation with Zvika floated through her mind, shifting shapes like clouds drifting by. At least on one count, he was right. There really was no discernible evidence to suggest that a crime had been committed. Taking Yafit Naim's history into account, it was much more logical to assume that she'd killed herself. And yet, she furrowed her brows skeptically, her husband had said that she wasn't suffering from depression. There was nothing to suggest that she was suffering from depression, no final note, no body. Something didn't add up. Yafit Naim's photograph was still lying on her desk, and she picked it up carefully and stared at the long and severe face, looking for signs of something that she couldn't name. She examined the photo for a long time, and for a moment, it seemed that something flashed there, a tiny glow, like the far-off flicker of a candle through a dense fog. She screwed up her eyes and reached forward, pushing the photo away from her, then retrieved it and held it in front of her eyes. Yes, she hadn't imagined it. Yafit Naim's face had changed. It was a slight and almost imperceptible change. A pleading expression now overlaid it, as delicate and slender as a spider's silk thread. She took her eyes off the picture and tried to shake off that queer impression. But when she looked again, that strange pleading look was still there, and a powerful physical sensation accompanied it, like a tingling that made its way through her entire body. Something was wrong here. She put Yafit's picture to the side, pulled all 5 folders towards her, and rearranged them into 2 piles. She stacked 4 of them on top of each other and pushed them aside. She would transfer Anatoly Shpozhnikov and Meir Eliyahu to Eddie, and she would hand over Rosa Avraham and Baruch Melinek to Revital. Let them start by talking to the relatives and see if there were any new developments. She left the 5th folder by itself in the middle of the desk. She carefully lifted Yafit Naim's picture once again. She now realized that her strange physical reaction to that stern face had been there this whole time, right from the start. Somehow, all along, she had known that something was amiss with this case. She took another look at the photo. The pleading look was now so unequivocal that she wondered how she hadn't noticed it before. It sketched over the long, pale face an almost explicit request. Find me.
Sorry, of course, the coughing fit came the moment Shuki was wrapping up. Hi, everyone. It's my great pleasure to introduce our next reader, Sigal Goldstein. So Sigal and I met and bonded over historical fiction, which we both love to read, except that one of us, namely her, is also talented enough to write it. And so I had the pleasure of directing her MA thesis called Middle of the Sky, which is part of a historical novel that Sigal is writing about the unlikely relationship between a 15th century monk and the young Jewish boy that he saves. And she approaches this story through a frame narrative about a contemporary young woman named Lily who discovers a stash of family documents leading back to that medieval legacy. So you can see it has all the makings of exactly the kind of fiction that, well, I like to read. And I was looking today and I found the sentence that Sigal wrote in her thesis proposal where she says that that she was hoping to show that how certain people, outliers of their society rather than the norm, are moved to act unexpectedly when faced with the needs and suffering of fellow human beings. And I think that's one of the multiple fascinating aspects of this story that she is working on telling. So, Sigal, all yours.
Thank you so much. Well, I'll start from the beginning, but I decided, I don't know if that was a good decision. I decided to skip Lily's parts and just read some of the historical parts. So I'll begin. There's first a quote at the beginning. It's, well, I won't read it. Prologue, The Monk and the Boy. Toledo, Spain, June 1492. Holding the boy's hand, the monk pushed through the crowd. I forgot that I need to put a timer on, right? I'm the most disorganized here. Here I go, wait. There it goes. The press of people added to his foreboding. It was early and the sun had yet to filter down into narrow Calle Comerceu, but it was already hot. Under his habit, sweat trickled down his back. On a normal day, it was a short walk from Calle San Miguel to Plaza de Zocodover, but today many had left their doings to see the auto da fe. The crowd thickened as they approached the plaza, the smell of sour sweat mingling with the stench of garbage on the street. The day before had been market day, and the air was redolent, with the fetid feces of animals brought for sale, mingled now with the stink of rotten vegetables and scraps carelessly cast from shop doorways. People hurrying to see the death of the Jews sent rats fleeing to dark corners. The monk, who could not abide such filth, stepped carefully to avoid the squelch of rot beneath his sandals. Life in the monastery had not prepared him for the feculence created by human beings and animals living together in close quarters. And the home of the Jews had been so clean. He guided the boy along, making good headway, thanks to his greater height and long stride. Even before they reached the big square, they saw the north wall of Alcazar fortress. They wound through the chasm of walls until these opened onto the Plaza de Zocodover. The monk saw them first. 30 prisoners, wearing vests over long-sleeved shirts and trousers in coarse black cotton striped with white. Most wore the San Benito, the scapular adorned with a blood-red cross of St. Andrew over chest and back. But all three Oliveiras wore the Samara, the gray scapular of the unrepentant. It was a beautiful day. The stones of the buildings around the square shone with that special slickness of sunshine after rain. And even in the thick of the city with its noise and stench, even above the smell of burning tar and wood, the monk smelled the fresh tang of herbs, sweet basil, wild thyme, and hyssop, wafting like a memory from the fields outside the city walls. It was that scent that brought tears to his eyes. The boy's mother, father, and sister were trussed to poles, like chickens ready for the oven. Pale feet, bare feet dangled. A guard stepped forward with a burning torch and touched the flame to the pile of wood at the base of one of the poles. The monk watched, unable to accept what he saw. Then his attention turned to the boy, who, owing to the press of people, had no line of sight to the tragedy. The small face was turned up to him, eyes wide and dark, and the monk realized his mistake. How could he be so stupid? He had blundered into this scene with a boy in tow, firm in his belief that it would not happen. He had been wrong. His intention to help the Oliveiras in some way changed into one thought only. The boy must not see his family die. He bent and lifted the boy into his arms, pressed the child's head under his chin to limit his sight, and ran back the way they had come. One arm protected the boy while the other pushed people aside, his long legs carrying them as fast as they could through the swelling throng. As he ran, he sang into the boy's ear, breathlessly, softly, the first thing that came into his head. O Holy Father, who hadst led thy children through all the ages, in the fire and cloud, through seas dry shod, through weary wastes bewildering, to thee in reverent love our hearts are bowed. A crackling signified the rising of flames, devouring the kindling at the feet of the Jews. The monk prayed to run fast enough to be far away before they began to scream. I'm skipping to chapter 4. La Gartera, Spain, November 1480. Andres was 10 years old when his father delivered him to the monastery in Sobrado dos Monxes. He stood with his father at the steps leading to the great door and thought of collecting eggs from the chicken coop early in the morning in the time before everything went wrong. He remembered his father whispering, "Andecito, be gentle. These young chickens have made breakfast for us." Carefully nudging the brown hen in the corner nest and bringing out an egg, creamy brown and lightly spotted, warm from the mama hen's belly. In later years, Andres marveled how, despite his youth, his impression that day on the monastery steps had been quite accurate. He had been just like that egg, taken from his warm home to be cracked open before he was ready. His mother had fallen sick a fortnight earlier, usually busy cooking, cleaning, singing as she washed their clothes. Her fingers, the envy of the women of La Gartera, nimbly embroidering the most beautiful designs, she lay silent now as the light slowly went out of her. Their father sat at her bedside, applying a cold wet cloth to her forehead and speaking to her so softly that none of them could hear what he said. As always, they had their secret connection. An old woman from the village came several times, bringing strange-smelling herbs, which Andres' sisters then boiled or burned in the room. One night, Andres woke to the sound of his father's praying and his sister's hopeless keening. He sat up and pushed away his blanket. It was a cold night in November, and high winds yowled around the house. Andres slept with his sisters in the attic, where the warmer air seeped towards the rafters. It was the warmest place in the house, but Andres still shivered when he cast the blanket aside. The sounds from below frightened him. He trod quietly down the wooden ladder and glanced toward his parents' bedroom. The curtain that served as partition was pulled closed. Of the two rooms on the ground floor, the smaller was his parents' bedroom, while the other served as kitchen and living area. Andres's older brother, Mateos, had a narrow pallet in the main room, near the hearth in winter where all the action was, and Andres, who wanted to be like his father and brother, often chafed at being banished to the attic with the girls. Matteo sat now on a bench at the kitchen table, and Claudia and Bianca sat across from him, supported in each other's arms. The girls wept openly, while Matteo sat straight as his mother's broomstick, staring stonily at his hands, fisted together on the table. Andres joined his brother, sitting straight as Matteo's and holding his hands like him. For a long time they sat this way. From time to time, Andres squinted sideways to check if anything had changed with Matteo's. The boy had grown lately, but his arms were still too short to sit comfortably this way. Whereas Matteo's leaned easily on his elbows, for Andres it was a stretch, so his back hurt. Then his stomach began to growl. He wanted his breakfast. The wind had abated and it was quiet outside. Morning light filtered in through the one window. Birds chirped and sang outside. As Andres sat perfectly still, his senses were heightened so that he smelled the dew wet on the grass outside their door. He knew that in the small shed adjacent to the house, their cows stirred uncomfortably. We should milk her, he thought. Her udders will be swollen. That's it. 7 minutes.
Thanks so much, Sigal. Okay. And now, bringing us home from this section for the graduate reading is Ching-wen Kao. I am so honored to have mentored Ching-wen as she completed her thesis in literary translation. Her title is modestly called The Selected Poems of Wen Qiang, and I know that I've butchered this name, and I know you'll pronounce it correctly in a little while. This poet was born in Taiwan in 1961, and her fascinating poems were extremely challenging. Ching makes it look very, very easy, but we spent weeks debating over how to translate a pair of words that sound the same in Chinese, but they don't sound the same in English. And so it was very, very challenging, and we came up with many interesting suggestions and solutions. And then no sooner had we done that than we got a new book, a new section of poems, which sounded as if they were written by a completely different poet. So the poet has written 5 different books, each one of them radically different from the other. The poems that Ching has selected were from her first 2 collections, Men's Nipples and Grandma's Cuisine. And you can tell by the titles how different they are, but they both embody the poet's feminist vision. They subvert poetic language and expand the boundaries of women's writing. Their publication influenced the third wave feminism in Taiwan, and it illustrated strategies that women's poets used to voice taboo topics and to reconstruct women's identity in the late 90s. They're also extremely funny, and Ching was just absolutely a pleasure to work with, and brought this humor with her when we were translating the work. So here she is.
Hi, everyone, and good evening. So I will be reading 2 poems, Men's Nipples, which is also the title poem of the poetry collection, Men's Nipples, and If a Fly Landed on a Breast, which is the first poem of the second poetry collection, Grandma's Cuisine. And as you already noticed, nipples and breast, yes, Wen Yujiang, the poet, she likes to use body parts in her poems. And she also, and I think it's not coincidence that she chose to that these 2 poems to be the first poems of her 2 poetry collections. So I will read a few lines in the original first, and then I will read the translation. 男人的乳头，从 A 罩杯至 D 罩杯找不着您的尺寸，原来你的只有小写，躺在铺上棉床的专柜里 A、B、C、D。原宣过于羞涩拘谨，你只允许自己以 O 型面目示人，圆满无缺闭锁，任何人可能为你搬出的辩解，英挺动人的天生富裕，不需要修饰的男人本色。Men's nipples. Your right size isn't found between the A and D cup. It turns out that yours is in lowercase, lying in a made-up bed in the shop A, B, C, D. At first, overly shy and reserved. In public, you allow yourself only the shape of an O. Perfect, flawless, closed. And people might as well defend you by saying, born to be tall, handsome, and attractive. Masculinity needs no adornment. Ardently, I put forth my most persuasive capitalistic reasoning. Free wrapping with tongue ribbons winding around the concentric circles makes it a thoughtful gift, rather suitable for lovers. A crescent arc is raised and slides down to the bottom right. Craving for more, it leaks on. Draped with tongue ribbons, your O is now elegant, like A. A downward movement comes from the top left, infinitely slimy. Right now, your O takes a deep breath, its spine erect and waist straight like B. The nimble tongue ribbons entwine, bringing waves of murmuring breath, warm and wet like the forehead / plum rains in early summer, a downpour that disturbs the late spring. Dry-mouthed and parched-throated, your reticent O parts its lips and moans rapidly like C. Oh, the tongue ribbons almost forgot to adorn the other O, who looks on anxiously, green-eyed, face reddening, like O. Running out of time for full preparation play, the luscious tongue proceeds to savor the sweetness and weave a decorative rose. The other O restores its self-esteem, strengthening its waist smilingly, like D. The lady in charge of male bras counter gazes with satisfaction at A, B, C, D, the lowercase styles exclusive to men. Now I'll go to the second point. 如果一只苍蝇飞落在乳房，如果一只苍蝇越过乳头，它的复眼看到10000颗加州阳光采过的葡萄干，还是10000粒9份矿山沙粒细缝里紫色的芋圆。假如一只苍蝇飞过乳房，它的复眼看到1000只装饰的倒立白玉瓷碗，还是1000只埋藏在玉山云雾里盛满小米酒的三角杯。If a fly landed on a breast, if a fly skimmed past a nipple, would her/his compound eyes see 10,000 raisins trodden by the California sun, or 10,000 purple taro balls among the gravel grains of 9份 gold mine? Supposing a fly flew over a breast, would her/his compound eyes see 1,000 upturned white jade porcelain decorative bowls, or 1,000 triangle glasses brimming with minute wine concealed in the cloud and fog of Jet Mountain? Assuming the fly landed on a breast, would her/his compound eyes see 100 curvy glass bottles of imported XO cognac, or 100 conical hats covered with sunlight, to-ing and fro-ing over the shadows of the farmers? A fly fell on a breast. Will her/his compound eyes see numerous papayas of improved variety, or numerous sticky rice dumplings concocted by grandma with the aesthetic principles of the pyramid? Or she/he would rather close the eyes, picturing a mother's climactic pretense of breastfeeding, hearing the whale cow roaring in the oceans thousands of miles away? Or she/he simply lay down quietly, became an island or a watermelon seed that fell on an allegedly luck-changing mole, telling mother that her destiny had also expanded? Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks so much. Now, while we're thanking people, I think we all should also thank Yoni Hamarkasoy, who is assisting with this reading. And he sent out all of the invitations. He did all of the correspondence and is helping with the Zoom session right now. The final portion of our reading this evening, we're going to hear 2 of the 3 winners of the Multicultural Israel Prize. Just to note that Naomi Hanak, our 3rd place winner, is unable to attend and she sends her apologies. The Multicultural Israel Prize was created by Professor Bill Kalkbrenner in response to the events of the spring 2021, which were so devastating to our country and our students. All of you here, you were already isolated by COVID, and you all were witnessing firsthand the violence and destruction in your communities. And at this time, I know we all came together on Zoom. We shared stories, we talked, we cried, and we affirmed our commitment to honoring one another's humanity. So in response, Professor Kalkbrenner, as the director of the Lecter Fund, wanted to honor our students and our communities in our larger Bar Ilan community by creating a prize to emphasize Israel's multiculturalism, that we all belong here. So we thank him, and we thank Bara Abid Elai, who volunteered to help the faculty members judge. Of the 17 submissions that were sent, you were all worthy. And we, in fact, argued over 6 finalists, any of which could have been one of the 3 winners. But the first place was clear to all of us. As a teacher and a supervisor for English language instruction, Fran Levin made use of her observations of various schools to present the inhabitants of our country, of our home, with such charm, humility, humor, and insight that I'll say that personally, I found myself reading her essay out loud to my family during the judging. So we'll hear from the first place winner, Fran Levin. Okay. And then Roy will hear the second place as well. But Fran, you're on.
Thank you. Good evening. I'd like to say thank you to Professor William Kalkbrenner on behalf of the Lecter Institute. I just feel incredibly honored to receive this prize. And I would also like to thank Professor Kalkbrenner for the amazing workshop where I began to learn the basics of essaying. And I have to say he was so generous with his time and his help. And I would definitely like to thank the whole faculty, because I just feel there's such a you can atmosphere that just empowers us. So the essay I wrote was basically a year in the life of an English teacher's counsellor, broken down into the 10 months of the school year. In each month, I visited a different school. I will be reading from March until June. March. No slang allowed. That unseen is too difficult, I shout at the team, the English mafia, in the junior high school in Kochavia Ir, where I teach special needs pupils during the week. Kochavia Ir is populated by a mixture of ex-army, high-profile personalities and a spattering of politicians. The school accepts children from the neighboring settlements of Sigal and Sufing. Every morning, busloads of teens arrive, the nouveau riche with the demanding helicopter parents, the offspring of established families with impressive army records, and the growing numbers of secular children with idealistic parents. The birth rate is growing. 4 or 5 children per family is normal. Our team includes Dennis, a Russian immigrant. This is his main job, but it doesn't provide enough of an income. So he often staggers into class after his night shift as a security guard. Our coordinator is a relic from the British Empire who has a poster of prohibited slang expressions up in her room next to the pictures of King Henry VIII's wives. She educates her classes about table manners and other British customs. Hagit is of Yemenite extraction. She acquired her flawless English from television programs. I love the way the irregular verbs sound in her Yemenite accent. April, hot meals and homework. The English room is almost ready. Miriam and I marvel at the sleek modular desks. She has returned from maternity leave after giving birth to twin boys. Miriam is an alternative mother figure to the children in this shabby religious school building in Kfar Yona. It houses a diverse population, older families who were sent to the original transit camps set up in the 1950s, young families attracted by the low-cost homes and many Ethiopian immigrants, children whose parents trekked across a dangerous desert en route to Israel. The school receives extra funding for basic necessities that many of them lack at home: hot meals, help with homework, clothing, school supplies, and enrichment in the afternoon. Many of the parents are unemployed or working menial jobs. Sometimes the children tell Miriam that they are hungry, and she brings them a snack from the staff room. She voluntarily tutors the weakest students in her preparation hours. We've been working hard together for several years, but it's taking so long to effect real change, maybe a whole generation. May, building blocks. Where do we go from here? Asks Dr. Ziona Levy, the National English Inspector. The who's who of the English teaching world is attending the final session of the Building Blocks Counselor's course. We are working on a national incentive to raise literacy levels in failing schools. Druze, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish counselors from across the country have presented initiatives and interventions. We pair up to discuss the question. I am seated with Rania, a Bedouin counselor from the southern region, a mother of 5 children. One of her main challenges is making sure that the children in the Bedouin communities are attending school. She describes villages without electricity or running water, neighborhoods in which it isn't clear how many school-age children there are, and the difficulties of contending with patriarchy and resistance to change. I'm a window shopper, staring at the goods, but infinitively distanced by the glass. This world exists alongside my bubble in the Sharon Valley. Where else could I have met her and had this conversation? June, and the winners are museum. This is an art museum. Museum, declares Anna. Heads bowed over sheets of paper, pencil scribbling, silence. I am a judge at the annual spelling bee, where 30 schools are competing with each other on a list of 300 pre-learned words from the English curriculum. The hall has been decorated with yellow and black bee motifs. The children wear t-shirts and headbands. Earlier on, I watched the teams arrive, and there were my teachers, Miriam, Rachel, American Helena, Russian Milana, Allegra, Amal, and Galit, the part-time writer. I gaze at the cross-section of competitors from the Arab towns, the ultra-Orthodox, religious, and secular communities, moshavim, kibbutzim, settlements and towns. 6 rounds of written words, and the contestants return to the audience as we mark the submissions in the intervals. Anna announces the names of the finalists who have reached the oral heats. One by one, they stand up to spell a given word. We go into the tiebreaker round, random words from the curriculum vocabulary. And the winners are Shirley from Kfar Saba, Hissam from Taiba, and Nehorai from Elad. There are no political polemics here, no divisive proclamations, no racial or religious slurs, only the enactment of fair play and sportsmanship. I wonder, how can we take the unique from each sector of our society and distill it into a heady potion in which the molecules unite and the divisions between the factions in our society dissolve? How do we import the notions of a Chabad birthday celebration, the color and hospitality of an Arab wedding, the horizons of secular education, the messages of religious traditions, and the beauty of immigrant culture into our students' experience? Is it even possible? Or could it be that English is our only vehicle for approaching each other? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fran. It's a beautiful testimony to what we're all doing here, and I really appreciate that essay. Our second place winner is Roy Atadgy, and he, as you see, is a man of many talents. He has written his fiction thesis, and he also is a wonderful essayist. His essay is insightful, humorous, and absolutely delicious. So those are the three ingredients of really good writing from this part of the world. And I'm very pleased to say that Roy is going to read a small portion of his essay now.
Awesome. The real multicultural McCoy. Israel is a prime candidate for melding cultures, found everywhere from its shkavim to its offspring. Indeed, in the way that the piled high pyramids of Turkish delights, baklava, and grain sacks of bright spices are parts of an intricate diasporic dance, so too are the children of blonde, blue-eyed Russians and dark-skinned Yemenites, punctual Yekes and worldly Frenchmen, or like me, a boisterous Moroccan and a reserved Pole. Stripped of the loaded political baggage the term multiculturalism carries, at least to an American like me haunted by coexist bumper stickers, one can actually appreciate the term in its real and intended meaning here, one underpinned by a truer coexistence, however tenuous and liable like a powder keg, to ignite every few years. If in America, multiculturalism is an aspiration rather than a practice, fraught by the pressure borne upon immigrant groups to ultimately assimilate, in Israel it's a realized way of life. People bring their traditions, they enrich the cramped country with them, sharing food and slang that bleed over into foreign kitchens and conversations. Different as these subcultures are, there's a central Israeli ethos to which all of them cohere. The prodding, the yelling, the lack of personal space, the heat, the wars, high taxes, dysfunctional government. It's crowded, it's hot, and patience is in short supply. Amending the list of official languages, we have Hebrew, Arabic, Russian, English, and car honks, the last of which is vitally and freely dispensed as naturally at 6 in the morning as during rush hour. Stress accumulates in checkout lines where cashiers are keen to remind shoppers of deals unfulfilled. Did you know that these are 3 for 10 shekels today? This prompts the person in line to leave his groceries, along with the 10 people waiting behind him to retrieve the 3rd bag of bamba, lest he fall prey to being a flyo, a sucker. The national obsession with not being a flyo seeps into every corner of Israeli life. Though after being here for some time, it's become clear that Israelis are among the biggest fryers in the world in what they're willing to shell out for nearly everything. But, convinced of the merits of their own wheeling and dealing, what they call kombinot, they are able to maintain the fryer-free illusion they have of themselves. The malls are packed during hours which, ordinarily, I'd think people would be at work, proving the term secondhand is not in avid use here as much as the term sale is. When IKEA arrived in Kiryat Ata, my uncle told me that they sold out of everything in almost 2 weeks. Talk about a clash of cultures, entire extended families obstructing the aisles, trying to make heads or tails of Swedish names. Jerusalem. Visiting a friend in Jerusalem's Christian Quarter, I noticed a photo of St. George slaying the dragon tacked outside his door. On the rusty nail fixing the photo to the sun-bleached board hangs a small black bracelet with a silver cross. His apartment is owned by Copts, an ancient Christian community from Egypt. We see one out in the main alley, decked in an all-black galabeya, with a large cross dangling from his neck. To get to the apartment, we open an inconspicuous steel door that feels like a portal to another world. The slippery, pockmarked stone presses in on a narrow, steep flight of stairs, with old iron rails ascending to a square-foot courtyard where the only burst of color is a young lime tree protecting the clay-potted plants underneath. The neighbor hears us out there and brings out cups of Sprite and lemon wafers. He's an eccentric fellow with slicked black hair that ends in ringlets at the nape of his neck. His gestures are flamboyant. Minus the hairdo, he's the exact doppelganger of Cosmo Kramer. Even the erratic hand movements are perfectly Cosmo's, though I doubt the neighbor has ever watched an episode of Seinfeld. There is no question he could have a lucrative future as Kramer's lookalike, the same way Elvis impersonators still seem to make a living. I want to bridge this opportunity with him, but I don't. And anyway, he has far more to offer. He is Greek Orthodox, but admits he is rather secular. When I ask what he does all day, he delivers a halting monologue in English. We wake up, we go walk, we sleep, we eat, tomorrow again. I'm arrested by the simplicity, and even more so by his universalizing to a we. For dinner, we go to the American Colony Hotel. Much like restaurants in America, the cocktails are expertly done, while the food fails to be something to write home about. Outside after dinner, my friend points in the direction of a sign beside a gas station just beyond the roundabout that reads, Sheikh Jarrah.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all of the graduates from our program. I have to say, you guys make us look so good. Thank you. And we will miss you. Please drop in, especially if we're going to be doing things on Zoom. Thanks so much to Fran and to Roy for reading your essays. They were really, really beautiful, and we need to find a way to make them available for everyone. Thank you all for being here. Good luck to all of you who are finishing your theses right now. I know several of you are here. And thanks again to everyone who taught, who supported, who loves you. We are so proud of you. Thank you. We will have the video available tomorrow. Thanks to Yoni. Okay. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. This was great.
Thank you, everyone. This was absolutely amazing.